On a bitterly cold evening in the heart of the city, a homeless veteran named James stood in line outside a crowded shelter. The winds howled, cutting through his worn coat as he waited his turn. He had served his country many years ago, but now, all that remained was a faded uniform and the haunting memories of battles fought long ago. Yet, all he longed for that night was warmth, a safe place to rest, and perhaps a moment of peace. As he approached the door, a stern-faced attendant stood in his way. "Sorry, we're full," she said briskly, barely making eye contact. "We don't have room for anyone else tonight." James, shivering from the cold, tried to plead. "Please, I've been on the streets for days. Just a spot on the floor, anything." "There's nothing we can do. You'll have to try again tomorrow," the attendant interrupted, her tone final, as she turned away. James stood frozen, his heart sinking. He had heard the excuses before. They didn't want someone like him, someone with a past, someone who had seen too much, someone who no longer fit in. The door slammed shut in his face, and the small, flickering light of the shelter seemed to fade away. As he walked away, a voice from behind stopped him. "Hey, old man, are you just going to stand there?" It was another homeless man, his face covered by a scruffy beard and layers of torn clothing. "You can sleep in the alley over there, but you better keep your guard up." James nodded grimly. He had learned to survive in the harsh world of the streets, but tonight felt different. There was a sense of betrayal in the air, a feeling that even after all he had done for his country, there was no place for him, not even in the shelter meant to provide refuge for people like him. As he walked away, he thought of his old comrades, many of whom had fallen, never making it back home. He thought of the families who had never received a letter or a call, never knowing what had happened to their loved ones. James had survived. But now, it seemed like his own country had turned its back on him. Little did anyone know, the man who was rejected that night was someone more significant than they could ever imagine. But that story would have to wait. For now, James had to find shelter in the cold city, with no one knowing the identity of the man they had just turned away. The night was long, colder than James had ever felt before. He found himself in an alley, his back pressed against the rough brick wall of a closed storefront. His breath came in visible clouds, his hands trembling as he tried to wrap himself in his coat. He closed his eyes, wishing for sleep, but the memories wouldn't let him. The distant sound of sirens, the occasional shout from a passing car, only reminded him of a life that seemed so far away from this cold, lonely existence. He had been back home for years, yet he still couldn't escape the horrors of his past. The missions, the friends who never returned, the constant feeling of being out of place. But there was something about tonight, the rejection, the indifference, it stung more than usual. He was tired of fighting battles that nobody else could see. As he sat there in the shadows, a figure approached him. A woman, young and well-dressed, her face illuminated by the dim light of a nearby street lamp. She hesitated when she saw him, unsure of whether to continue walking or offer help. James looked up, his tired eyes meeting hers. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice full of concern. James didn't answer immediately. He had learned to ignore such questions long ago. But something about this woman, her sincerity, made him speak. "No. I've been out here all night. The shelter turned me away," he muttered. The woman frowned, her brow furrowing with confusion and disbelief. "What? You're a veteran, right? Why would they turn you away?" James shook his head, feeling the sting of her words. "Doesn't matter. They don't care about people like me anymore." But the woman wasn't ready to walk away. She crouched down beside him, studying his face with an intensity that made James feel exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't felt in years. "Wait a minute," she said, her voice lowering. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" James raised an eyebrow. I don't think so. The woman took a step back, eyes narrowing as she studied him more carefully. You're James Connors, aren't you? The name struck him like a lightning bolt. He had buried that identity so deep, hiding behind his rags and his coat. He hadn't used that name in years. He didn't want anyone to know who he was, not anymore. But the woman's eyes seemed to pierce right through him. How do you know that name? James asked, a mix of anger and fear rising in his chest. The woman didn't flinch. I've seen your face on the news. You were a war hero, a Medal of Honor recipient. You served in the Gulf War. You led a team through enemy lines and saved dozens of lives. You're a legend. James felt a rush of emotions, shame, pride, confusion. The news, he had long since abandoned the spotlight, the interviews, the awards. But now, in this cold, forgotten corner of the world, the woman had uncovered a piece of him he thought was long buried. I was, he said, his voice trailing off. But that was a lifetime ago. The woman stood up, her face filled with both admiration and disbelief. You don't deserve to be out here. You've given everything for your country. You're a hero. James looked up at her, the words striking him deeper than any combat injury ever had. He hadn't considered that. He hadn't considered the possibility that someone, anyone, might still care, might still remember what he had done. Before he could respond, she pulled out her phone, her fingers tapping quickly. I'm going to make a call, she said. I'll make sure you're not left out here tonight. You deserve better than this. James didn't know whether to feel grateful or overwhelmed. What was it about this woman that made her want to help? Was it pity or something else? He didn't have time to dwell on it, though. He was about to learn that the woman who had found him in the alley wasn't just an ordinary passerby. She had a connection to his past that he could never have imagined. The woman spoke into her phone with urgency, her voice firm but calm. Yes, I have someone here. James Connors. He's a veteran who has just turned away from the shelter. She paused for a moment, listening. No, we can't wait until tomorrow. Please, I need you to act fast. James watched her, feeling a strange mixture of confusion and curiosity. She seemed so calm, so sure of herself. Who was she to know how to get help for him so quickly? His life had become a series of small, unnoticed moments, each passing day blending into the next. Yet here was this stranger, treating him like someone worth saving. The woman hung up the phone and turned to him. They're sending a car for you. You'll be safe soon, she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. But then she looked at him with a knowing expression. You have no idea, do you? James furrowed his brow. No idea about what? She smiled, a strange, knowing smile. About who I really am, or why I know who you are. James stood up slowly, his body stiff from the cold. I don't understand. Why do you care about me? The woman's eyes softened, and she took a step closer. Because I'm your niece. The words hit James like a shockwave. His breath caught in his throat.
What? No.
That's not possible. My family. She held up a hand. I know. They cut ties with you after the war. After everything that happened, they didn't know how to handle it. They blamed you for things that were out of your control. But I never gave up on finding you. I've been looking for you for years. James's mind raced, trying to process what she was saying. His family had abandoned him. He had accepted that long ago. He had no idea that anyone cared enough to look for him, to search through the years of silence and rejection. Why didn't you just say this earlier? James asked, his voice trembling. Why hide it? The woman's expression grew somber. I didn't want to hurt you. I knew how much pain you carried from your time in the war, and I didn't want to force you into remembering things you wanted to forget. But you didn't deserve to be forgotten like this. James took a deep breath, his emotions swirling. He had always believed that his family had erased him from their lives. His mind flashed back to the day he left for deployment, his family waving goodbye with stiff smiles, pretending they weren't scared. He thought they had moved on without him, and for years, he had told himself it was better that way. But now, standing in front of him, was the niece he never knew he had. And for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The car arrived shortly after, and the woman helped James into the back seat, her hand gently resting on his arm. "We're going to get you cleaned up, get you the help you need," she said. "You don't have to be alone anymore." James looked out the window as they drove through the city, the familiar streets now feeling foreign to him. The world was still cold, still harsh, but there was something different now. He wasn't alone anymore. As they reached their destination, a safe house for veterans, the woman turned to him one last time before they went inside. "You don't have to live in the shadows anymore, Uncle James. You've done your part. Now it's time for us to take care of you." And for the first time in years, James felt like he was coming home.